But if you track through Deuteronomy 4:19 and 20, the Israelites are forbidden from worshiping the host of heaven, whom the Lord has allotted to the other nations. Then you hit Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 and 9, which will be the next session, and you have other sons of God appointed to the nations and the nations to them. And this is where we get the fragmentation of humanity, which is the basis for Old Testament spiritual warfare, which we'll talk about. And Jehoshaphat's looking around like, and he actually asked, is there a prophet of Yahweh around here we could talk to? And Ahab says, yeah, I have one of those, but I hate that guy. Because he says, I hate him because he never tells me what I want to hear. So they bring him out, and Micaiah, sort of acts like the Baal prophets at first to make a joke of the whole situation. But then he gets serious and he says this. So Micaiah said, therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne with all the host of heaven standing beside him to the right and to the left of him. And the Lord said, who will entice Ahab so that he may go up and fall at remote Gilead? Then one said one thing, another said another, like a debate breaks out in the meeting of the heavenly host, in the council. I got this idea, that idea. No, your idea is stupid. So they actually have a little debate until a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord saying, I've got it. Okay, I'll entice him. How? The Lord asked. He replied, I'll go out and be a lying spirit in the mouth of all these prophets. And then the Lord said, yeah, that'll work. So this is how you should look at Elohim. In the spiritual world, here's my primitive drawing of the spiritual world here. And by the way, I could go off on this drawing too, because I hope you realize, because I get questions about, well, like, are there like different places in hell and different like neighborhoods and, like the righteous go to Sheol. Does that mean they go to hell? Jesus descended, Apostles' Creed, descended to hell, which is a terrible translation of Hades, but that's what the Apostles' Creed has. Like, is it all like one block and then, like different houses? The problem is the spiritual world is a place that doesn't have height, depth, or width. It has no spatiality. It has no latitude or longitude. But we, as embodied beings that experience spatiality every moment of our lives, are forced to use the vocabulary of embodied physical existence for a place that doesn't have any of that stuff. So this is why we get descriptions like we do in the Bible of neighborhoods in the afterlife. Well, there's a good neighborhood, a bad. You don't want to go over here. You got to stay away from that one. And then if you're in the bad part of town, the bad part of the spiritual world, there are some places that are even worse than others. Like again, we're forced to talk about a placeless place or a non-spatial place with this vocabulary. So like sometimes I would tell students things like, okay, we're gonna do a little assignment, in-class writing assignment. And what I want you to do right now is describe the spiritual world, but you're not allowed to use any terms that have height, depth, or width, or spatiality. Go. And they look at you like, what am I supposed to do now? Okay, let's change the assignment. I want you to draw a spirit being, but you can't use any vocabulary of embodiment. Go. I got a blank piece of paper. How's that? You win. Okay, that's the answer. We don't have the language to describe a thing we have never experienced and actually have no part in living in. We are left to use the vocabulary we have to do the best we can. And the biblical writers are no different. God picks them and says, no, do the job. Use the language that you have because you're writing to people that use the same words. Even if I downloaded super fantastic, nonsensical to everybody else vocabulary, but that would be the perfect vocabulary, anybody reading your stuff isn't going to be able to understand it. So it defeats the communication enterprise. That isn't what God does, okay? God picks people, says, here's what I want you to do. He prompts them to write something, do a good job, and okay, 2 thumbs up, you pass, that'll do. God knows he's dealing with people. He knows what he's working with, and he's fine with using them. Okay? He's made that decision, he's going to do it. So when we come to the spiritual world, in the spiritual world, you've got a lot of Elohim. You have the council members, the demons, quote unquote, gods of the nations, disembodied dead, and you have Yahweh, of course. And Yahweh is a Godhead. Last night we talked mostly about the two, the binitarian, okay, the two Yahweh figures. Yahweh is more than one person in one essence. And by the way, that is not a unique idea to the Hebrew Bible. You can find that idea like in Assyrian texts as well. So I'm sorry, Bart Ehrman, or again, some other scholar that wants to say all these ideas are invented later. You don't know the material. Okay, you just don't. Other nations have this category that a deity can be two deities in different places and yet be the same. Okay, that's not an invention, that is in the Bible alone and something late. They have these categories to think about deity with. So, this is why, just rabbit trail one more second here. If you're interested in that subject, I recommend to you Benjamin Sommer's book. It's Sommer. He is a Jewish professor of Hebrew Bible at the Jewish Theological Seminary. Hint, he's Jewish. Okay? He is not an evangelical Christian, but his book, Bodies of God, talks about this. Now, you'll have to pardon him because he doesn't have all the Christian nuancing, so he's going to sound a little bit like a modalist. If you know what that is, then you can catch the drift here. But he will say things point blank in his book, that the idea of a Christian Trinity is perfectly compatible with the Hebrew Bible. That is a Jew saying stuff like that because he knows the wider ancient Near Eastern material. And we talked about the two powers thing last night. I mean, again, there are streams of Judaism that are well aware of this. So again, this is what we need to be thinking about. Elohim as a term, think of it this way. You would use Elohim as a term to describe something if that something was a member of the disembodied spiritual world. That's all it is. It has nothing to do with a specific set of unique attributes. Yahweh is an Elohim. No other Elohim is Yahweh. That's their theology in a nutshell. Now, I often get questions. All right, so we're going to go through some FAQs. And by the way, I don't have a clock here. Well, I guess I do have a clock. Of course, I don't remember when we started, so I'm going to ignore the clock. So, I have a habit of doing that anyway. Clocks are a big fail, with me. So, a couple of FAQs. Isn't it true that the Old Testament calls Jewish elders or judges gods? This you'll get all the time. And there are people who post things on YouTube or whatever, internet, snickering at me and, Heiser is just, this is ridiculous. Doesn't he know this? Yeah, I know it. Okay, that would mean, again, the gods here are just people. More broadly, the Jews get to be children of God, newsflash, like the rest of us. Acts 17 said that Paul said that to the Gentiles too. They get, that's all it means. The gods here are just men. Isn't that true? Short answer is no, but I don't like short answers. Let's go out to Psalm 89 for this. This implodes in two quick ways, and then you get into the nuts and bolts of the stuff. So here's Psalm 89. Now remember, what you're supposed to believe is that in Psalm 82, the gods in the council are just men. Yes, I know you're thinking, well, why are men sentenced to die like men? Just throw that out of your head. Yes, I know that's a contradiction, but let's just pretend verse 6 isn't there. So here we have Psalm 89. Let the heavens praise your wonders, O Lord, your faithfulness in the assembly of the holy ones. We get some of that council language, that good chunky goodness council language right there. For who in the skies can be compared to the Lord? Who among the heavenly beings is like the Lord? That's heavenly beings. We have B'nai Elohim. So it's not B'nai Elyon this time, it's B'nai Elohim. So sons of God, which again, we have sons of God in Psalm 82. They're just called the sons of the Most High. And for the biblical writer, there is only one Most High. It's God. So they're sons of God. Who in the skies can be compared to the Lord? Who among the heavenly beings is like the Lord? A God feared in the council of the holy ones, great and awesome above all that are around him. You say, well, what's the point, Mike? Well, the point is that Psalm 89 has the same council language with sons of God, just like Psalm 82 does, but it has one thing Psalm 82 doesn't. The council is in the skies. So again, the last time I looked in both my Bible and the world around me, we don't have a bunch of Jewish people in the skies ruling things. I'm sorry, but we don't. We don't have a group of Jewish mortals ruling anything in the spiritual world either. How would that make sense? You know, it doesn't make any sense, but you will see this all the time. The skies, again, this is vocabulary for where God lives, just like the heavens. Shemayim, here it's Shakach. How do we describe, again, as beings who are embodied and we don't have the vocabulary to describe what it's really like to be disembodied and placeless? You know, that we're not confined by space and time. How do we describe? We can't. So what we do, and biblical writers are no different, they use the language available to them to describe where God is and where not. So God lives up there. He lives in the heavens. His host are the starry skies, the heavenly host, the celestial host. God might also live on the top of mountains. By the way, in the biblical world, they didn't have REI, where you'd go equipment, you'd buy equipment and then go climb a mountain. They don't do that. They don't have oxygen tanks, okay? Nobody is going to the top of mountains. The gods are perceived to live there because it's remote, it's distant from icky mortals. But they like to live in the heavens. They're celestial beings. A lot of, some gods will live in the sea for the same reason. Because you can't live there. You don't live there. It creates distance. It's otherworldly. It's an otherworldly existence. This is why the gods live where they live. We could drill down and talk about how the gods also live in paradise gardens and paradise mountains, because, of course, the gods would have the penthouse. When they come to earth, okay, they live in the best places where there's no want. They always have enough water. They always have enough food because they're the gods. Like, duh. They're just going to have the best of everything. Again, these are the ways that biblical writers and other writers across cultures, this is the way they describe beings from this other world using ideas from our world to communicate the distance between us and them, to indicate the otherness of them compared to us. It's just how it's the only strategy you have. And Shakach and Shemayim, this is what it's trying to accomplish. The council's in the skies. It's up there. It's where the spiritual world is. It's up there. Again, there aren't, I see a Jewish guy. He just floated across. No, it's ridiculous. And it's amazing you'll find this in academic literature. They'll also appeal to Exodus 18. Now again, remember, this will be interesting to see if my visual filter came over. Let's just see here. Oh, bummer, it didn't. So that has to be resident on my laptop. So we learned something. Okay. Let me think here. Do I have... You know what? Pardon me for a second. Let's see here. I'm going to make one just so that you can see it here. Let's make a visual filter. And I'm going to search. Let's just do it this way. Hopefully I won't mess it up here. So we got the lemma. No, don't want that. All right, let's try to do it this way then. See if that works. Okay, well, we'll take a whack at it. Let's see if it works. Okay. Oh, I did. So now I just made a visual filter for all of the places in, again, the translation here that use the word Elohim. Now remember, what we're asked to believe is that the Elohim are just Israelite leaders and judges and the people who make decisions for the community and whatnot. And people will go to Exodus 18 because this is the chapter where Moses, at the behest of Jethro, appoints judges, appoints help for Moses, because it's just too much for Moses to do. So let's take a little tour through Exodus 18 and see where Elohim occurs. There's Jethro, the priest of Midian, heard all that God, Elohim, had done for Moses. He hasn't heard what the Israelite judges did for Moses. Okay, crossing the Red Sea. It wasn't a bunch of traffic cops, okay, Jewish elders holding back the water. It was the God of Israel, capital G. We go down here, we're at the mountain of God. That's obvious, Sinai. We know who that Elohim is. Oh, here we have a lowercase one. I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, and it's the gods of the Egyptians that he just defeated. So we know who those, deities are, the losers. So Moses' father-in-law brought a burnt offering and sacrificed to God. He's not sacrificing to other Jews. He's sacrificing to the God of heaven. They eat bread with Moses' father-in-law in the presence of God. They eat the sacrifice there, so on and so forth. The people, Moses explains to Jethro why all these people come to him with questions. They come to me to inquire of God. They're not coming to him to inquire of the Jewish judges or elders because they haven't even been named yet. So this is capital G. I make known unto them the statutes and instructions of big G God, okay? Moses' father-in-law says, you shouldn't do this. It's just, it's too much work. Now listen to me, verse 19. I'll give you counsel, and God be with you. You should represent the people before God, and you should bring their cases before God. Do that. Keep doing that. When they have a really hard question, you, Moses, take that question to the Lord. Okay, that's good. Teach them, all this stuff. But, verse 21, you should look also for able men among all the people, men who fear God. Doesn't say men who fear themselves, okay? Men who fear God are trustworthy and hate dishonest gain. Pick some men to help you out. Let them sit as judges. You notice that the word judges is not highlighted here because it's not the word Elohim. It doesn't say, let them sit as Elohim for the people. No. It doesn't say that. So if we want to turn on our interlinear, judges is shofatim, or the plural anyway, this plural verb form. Let's see here. Let them bring every important case to you. If you do this and God so commands you, then you'll be able to endure. This is good advice. And now we're at the end of the chapter. So does Exodus 18 teach that the Israelite judges are Elohim? No, it doesn't. And neither does any other passage. Now, if you want some of those other passages, because some of them are a little more interesting than others, go to the archive I showed you at the beginning of the session. drmsh.com, put in Monotheism archive, you'll find the web page. Look for the specific article on it's the one that talks about Elohim with a plural verb form, a plural predicator. You need to know a little Hebrew for that, but I think you can still get a lot out of it even if you don't. That's a published peer-reviewed journal article I wrote. This is a bankrupt position, but you will find it consistently in commentaries. You just will. And it's too bad, but you will. So no, the answer to that frequently asked question is no. I just showed you some of the reasons why. Another one, don't phrases like none besides me, none like me. God says there's none besides me, there's none like me. Don't they contradict this? Well, I would say those phrases, do not, but the argument goes the phrases can't be true. God can't really say there's none like me if there are other Elohim that exist. Now, you already know the answer to this because Elohim itself as a term it's not about a specific set of attributes. So you actually already know the answer to this. But, in longer form, these statements are statements of incomparability. Now, I'm going to save a little time here. I'll just summarize this rather than go out to all the passages. You remember Deuteronomy 32:17 when the Israelites sacrificed to Shadim, who are called Elohim right there in the verse, and then Paul quotes that verse to talk about demons. And obviously Paul thinks they're real. And so do I, and so should everyone else that has a high view of Scripture, to be perfectly blunt about it. That's in Deuteronomy 32. Now, in Deuteronomy 32, you have, around verse 39, you have one of these statements. There's none besides me. There's none like me. Wait a minute. We just saw that there were Elohim back in verse 17. My favorite illustration for this, though, is Deuteronomy 4:35. I'll show you that verse here. To you it was shown so that you would acknowledge that the Lord is God. There is no other besides him. Okay, this is Deuteronomy 4:35. Now, in the next session, I'm going to do a little bit more with Deuteronomy, but if you track through Deuteronomy 4:19 and 20, the Israelites are forbidden from worshiping the host of heaven, whom the Lord has allotted to the other nations. So the worship of these other celestial things, okay, God says, I've basically sentenced the other nations to worship them, not you guys, not Israel. You keep reading through Deuteronomy and you hit Deuteronomy 17. The host of heaven that we're not supposed to worship in Deuteronomy 4 are called Elohim in Deuteronomy 17, 1 through 3. You keep reading to Deuteronomy 29, 23 through 26. It uses the allotment language again of the host of heaven. This is why God judged the land, because they went off and worshiped the host of heaven who were not allotted to them. Then you hit Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 and 9, which will be the next session. And you have other sons of God appointed to the nations and the nations to them. And this is where we get the fragmentation of humanity, which is the basis for Old Testament spiritual warfare, which we'll talk about. Then you keep reading and you hit verse 17, and those beings that God punished the nations with, Israel winds up worshiping them. They worship the Shadim, these territorial entities that have control over these other nations. And Israel sins by worshiping. Deuteronomy has a whole theology, here's the point, of other Elohim. So that should tell you that when you run into in chapter 4, verse 35, Deuteronomy 32, 39, that the writer's not, well, I know we've got all this theology back there, but I'm just going to deny it here. Or I know we have all this theology coming up, but I feel like I'm going to just throw a monkey wrench into the thing and I'm going to create a contradiction within the book I'm writing. Haha. Hope you figure that out. Okay, it's not a contradiction. These are statements of incomparability. And I think really easily the place to go for this is there are a couple of places where these denial phrases show up where denial of existence is not possible. Or you would probably be like an insane person, okay? So Isaiah 47. Let's just move this over here. We'll resize it. Make it a little bit bigger. Close that off. Now, if we go up to verse 1, this is about Babylon, okay? So you keep reading down here, and you get to, let's see here. You say, I shall be mistress forever, so that you do not lay these things to heart or remember their end. Now therefore hear this, you lover of pleasures, who sit securely, who say in your heart, I am, and there is no one besides me. So the prophet is railing, and God through the prophet is railing against Babylon. And here's one of Babylon's claims. There's no one besides me. So are we really to read the same denial phrase that you're going to find elsewhere when God is comparing himself to other Elohim? If we're saying in those passages that there's none besides me means that there are no other gods that exist, well, I guess Babylon is claiming that there are no other cities on the planet. Again, what Babylonian priest, or slave or whatever is going to say, yeah, we're the only city in the world? It's not what they're saying. Babylon is saying, I'm the best. I am incomparable. I have no equal. It's not a statement of non-existence. It is a statement of incomparability. You get the same thing in Zephaniah 2, and this time it's Nineveh. This is the exultant city that lives securely and said in her heart, I am, and there is no one else. Well, Nineveh, you got a problem because Babylon thinks they're the only city that exists too. So you guys go fight it out. I mean, that's not what's being said. They're not statements of non-existence. They are statements of incomparability, the claim to be without equal. So no, we don't have a problem here. We don't have a contradiction here. Third frequently asked question. Why does God need a council? Isn't he omnipotent and omniscient? What could the council do that God can't? Of course, the short answer is he doesn't need a council. Of course not. For these very reasons. He is omnipotent. He is omniscient. God doesn't need a council for any of these things. Do we know? Do any analogies occur to us? Why does God need the church? The answer is, he doesn't. Why does God need you? Why does he need me? The short answer is, he doesn't. God could very well do everything he wants to do in the blink of an eye and be done with it. So the larger question is, why does he use you and me and the church? And why does God allow participation of other heavenly beings in a council to make decisions? Why does he do that? The answer is, he just likes to do that. That's the way he operates. And there's a deeper reason for it. It gets us into the whole image of God concept. Imaging is a status. It is not a quality. It's not an attribute given to humans. It is a status. And it's also a status given to the beings that God made like himself in the supernatural world. This is actually why we get plural language in Genesis 1. You have two families essentially. The spiritual family, the human family, originally they were supposed to be one in one place, Eden. Heaven comes to earth because earth cannot go to heaven. Where God is, his entourage is with him, his servants are with him. He creates humans to be fit for sacred space. It is the most natural thing in the world in God's head to have humans with him, with the rest of his heavenly host. That's what's lost at Eden and what is being regained in biblical theology all the way to the end of the book of Revelation. Okay, I just gave you the biblical meta-narrative in like 30 seconds. That's what it is. God does this because he created them and he created you, humans, in such a way, he shares his attributes with us, that he can make them, and here's the image idea, he can make them his proxies. We are his proxies, his representatives on this planet. Humans are. Now the fall that is marred and messed with, it's not lost. We know that because of Genesis 9:6. Okay, we're not going to worry about that right now. But believers are the only ones that can even have a prayer of imaging God properly, because we also have the Holy Spirit. Okay? I mean, all these concepts, Holy Spirit, image of God, kingdom, they're all interlocking. And this is the problem that we have, sorry for the rabbit trail, but this is the problem we have within churches, the serious churches, the real ones, the believing ones like this one. Every church has the same problem. And that is, we are tasked as those who teach and preach, we want to communicate biblical knowledge and biblical truth. But the difficulty isn't so much giving you data points, because if you stick to the text in your preaching, people are going to learn the scriptures, and that's what the pastor's job is, fundamentally. But it becomes difficult to know what to do with the data points. You have to have some sort of overarching story or, meta-narrative or whatever. You got to have a framework into which the pieces fit. Think of how you build a puzzle. When you create the perimeter first, and that gives you guidance on what to do with the rest of the pieces, and you build it out. And the problem is we have a lot of people who know biblical data points, but they don't have anything into which to put them so that they can see how they interconnect. That's the issue. And so all these things are familiar. They were familiar to me, they were familiar to you, but I didn't have any means to see the interconnectivity of it. That's what's missing. Again, and you're fortunate to be at a church that this is the effort that's being made. And it's not easy. It's a difficult task. It just takes a lot of time. And this is one of those things, Why does God need the church? He doesn't. Why does he use it? Why does he use a council? Because he created beings to not only be his children and to represent him, he created them to be partners. That's part of imagery. We act as he would in our place. Okay, we are essentially him to the rest of the world. The ultimate imager is Jesus. That's why he's called the image of God. You realize Jesus is called the express image of God in the New Testament. We are being conformed to the image of his Son. Okay, this is discipleship. It's becoming more like him and behaving like he does and is and would do. All these things are interlocking, they're interrelated. So a couple of examples. Again, we're basically running out of time here. I'll show you one. Well, I might cheat and show you two. This is Micaiah. The short version is, Micaiah is a prophet of Yahweh. He's in jail, under the wicked king Ahab. And Ahab wants Jehoshaphat in the south, the southern king, to partner with him in a battle. And so Jehoshaphat goes up and visits with him, to talk about this. Ahab trucks out all his prophets, and oh, Ahab, you're awesome, thumbs up. Yeah, you're the big dude, you're going to win, go up there and, kick butt in remote Gilead. And Jehoshaphat's looking around and he actually asked, is there a prophet of Yahweh around here we could talk to? And Ahab says, yeah, I have one of those, but I hate that guy. Because he says, I hate him because he never tells me what I want to hear. So they bring him out, and Micaiah, sort of acts like the Baal prophets at first to make a joke of the whole situation. But then he gets serious and he says this. So Micaiah said, therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne with all the host of heaven standing beside him to the right and to the left of him. And the Lord said, who will entice Ahab so that he may go up and fall at remote Gilead? Then one said one thing, another said another, like a debate breaks out in the meeting of the heavenly host, in the council. I got this idea, that idea. No, your idea is stupid. So they actually have a little debate until a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord saying, I've got it. Okay, I'll entice him. How? The Lord asked. He replied, I'll go out and be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. And then the Lord said, yeah, that'll work, because I know Ahab really well. He's going to fall for that immediately. It's going to appeal to his ego, all right? I'll go out and be this lying spirit in the mouth of his prophets, the Lord said, you will entice him, you shall succeed, so go out and get it done. Now, earlier in the chapter, God has decreed that it's time for Ahab to die, but he lets members of his host participate into how we get that done. How are we going to carry out the Lord's decree? He lets them participate. And we could go to Daniel 4. This is a little quicker. We'll skip Daniel 7 because we saw that last night. Daniel 4, this is Nebuchadnezzar is visited by a watcher, that is a holy one. And this is when he gets visited by this, supernatural being, and the being says to Nebuchadnezzar, because you're so arrogant, you're going to go insane for a while. You're going to eat grass, your fingernails are going to grow real long, you're just going to be basically an animal. But I just want you to know why this is happening to you, because you're a jerk, okay? So, they go through this, and you get down to, let's see here, verse 17. The sentence is rendered by decree of the watchers, plural. The decision is given by the order of the holy ones, plural. It's a council decision. You go down to verse 25, we realize that we don't have a rogue council here. Here, you've learned that the Most High has sovereignty over all the kingdom of mortals and gives it to whom he will. Right here, this is a decree of the Most High. So God and his council are in agreement, but nevertheless, the text actually says, and the watcher tells Nebuchadnezzar, the council has decided that you're going to be a beast for a while. Sorry. No, not sorry. So God just chooses to do this. Last one here. What about Jesus? Haven't you ever wondered, Son of God, sons of God, because you have sons of God in the Old Testament that are supernatural beings. Like how do we do this? How does this work? How can Jesus be the Son of God? We're not going to go to John 10. We don't have time for that. But John 3:16, we all know, for God so loved the world that he gave his only, in some translations, only begotten Son. Okay, the word there is monogenes. Let me just show it to you so you know I'm not making it up. Ooh, lots of highlighting here. You must like this passage. Okay, ESV has only, all right? There it is, monogenes. It used to be thought that monogenes, the Greek term, came from two separate Greek words, monos, which means alone or only, and then genao, which is a verb which means to beget, to produce children, okay? And so this is why older translations, or again, pretty traditional translations, will have only begotten. This really isn't the opinion anymore, again, through a variety of reasons. Now it's considered that monogenes comes from monos, one or only, and gene, which means kind or type. So the term literally means one of a kind, unique, which is why you get only here. Some other translations will have God gave his unique Son. And what's interesting about it is the term actually shows up in Hebrews 11:17. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son. There it is, monogenes. Question: was Isaac Abraham's only son? No. In fact, he's not even the oldest son that Abraham had. Ishmael was born earlier by a different woman, which is actually the key. Why is Isaac referred to as monogenes? Because he's unique. He is the son of Sarah, who could not have children. And he's also the son of the promise. That's why he's called monogenes. So it's perfectly fine to have multiple sons of God who are celestial beings. That doesn't step on Jesus in any way, because Jesus is monogenes. Jesus is unique. What's unique about Jesus that isn't true of all the other ones? He is God. They are not. He is. He's also eternal. He's got some other attribute things going for him, in his pre-incarnate state. But this is why there's no contradiction.